I want to thank all of you for coming to this event. This is the first language alumni panel that we've had, and what we hope will become an annual event with representatives of the many different languages we teach on campus, giving each of you, all of you as students, a chance to see how these people are putting their language study into practice in their own lives. We'd like to thank the sponsors of the event, the Colgate Language Council, the Center for International Programs, the Keck Center for Language Study, and the various language departments on campus: Romance Languages and Literatures, Russian and Eurasian Studies, Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies, German, and East Asian Languages and Literature. As we begin, I just want to say a few words, because I think there are a lot of reasons that college students study languages. Maybe your helicopter parents insist that it will make your CV stand out to employers. Maybe you read some BuzzFeed listicle that guaranteed you'd make more money if you were bilingual. Or maybe your Arabic professor persuaded you with promises of endless baklava. But while I'm a fan of all these practical reasons, I want to point out another benefit that is less obvious to those who haven't fully immersed themselves in language study. Learning a foreign language forces us to inhabit a liminal space between two cultures. From the vantage point of a new language, we can reassess our own native tongue and native culture in a new way, through the lens of another culture's words. While we might frame another country, another culture, or another language as our object of study, we inevitably find that the true object of study is ourselves. Studying foreign languages has a power beyond the command of vocabulary and verb forms. It opens our minds to the new possibilities of an intercultural world. It makes learners more prepared to deal with the nuances, ambiguities, and often the absurdities of everyday life. Learning a new language opens possibilities far beyond the utilitarian goals of becoming a productive worker. Learning a new language allows us to engage in the world at a deeper level and in more complex ways. I'm excited to present to you today our panelists who have each found unique ways of putting their knowledge of another language, another culture into practice in their professions. First, Greg Labenka, who graduated from Colgate in 2005 as a double major in International Relations and Russian Studies. He later graduated from Georgetown University with a master's degree in Security Studies. Since 2005, he has worked in Washington as a foreign affairs and national security analyst in the public sector. Greg lives in Clarksburg, Maryland, with his wife Kay, also from the class of 2005, their two young sons, William and Daniel, and a fish named Gogol. Is that right? Second, we have Edgardo Miranda Rodriguez, who graduated from Colgate in 1993. He is an artist and owner of the Brooklyn-based studio Somos Arte. Edgardo's true passion is still the comic books of his youth and has turned his childhood obsession into a fruitful career, producing graphic novels through his studio, working as a writer for Marvel Comics, and curating art exhibitions featuring Marvel superheroes and the work of its artists. Before finding success as an artist and entrepreneur, Edgardo worked as an organizer promoting social justice and empowering youth through culturally and socially conscious events. His continued dedication to these values and to his community is embodied in his new original comic book character, La Boriqueña, a strong female superhero who draws her powers from the island of Puerto Rico. And right after this event at 6 p.m. in Golden Hall, he'll be speaking about that comic book. So if you want to go down there and get some more of Edgardo. And then finally, Luna Zagoratz, who graduated from Colgate last year as a double major in astronomy, physics, and anthropology. During her time at Colgate, she was an alumni memorial scholar, and during her senior year, she won the Physics and Astronomy Department Founders Award. She served as president of the Secular Association of Skeptical Students, or SAS, and the Arabic Language and Cultural Club. While at Colgate, she participated in extended study living in Egypt, studied at the American University in Cairo in the spring of 2015, and did archaeological excavation work in Upper Egypt during the summer of 2015. So as we proceed, I'm going to turn the time over to them, and each of them will give some background about how they study languages, what they've done with languages, and any interesting facts that they thought were pertinent to you. And then we'll open the floor up to questions from all of you. So start thinking of those questions now, because that'll be your time. So I'll turn it over to you, and we can just go in that order if we want to go Greg, Ricardo and then Luna. That work? Thanks.
Thanks for the intro. So I want to really focus on, I think, kind of three core things about what I took out of my language experience here at Colgate. So as a quick reminder, 01 to 05, and I was a double major, international relations and Russian. The three things I took away from it, which I'll speak about in turn, are the importance of expertise that language study gives you and helps you convey to others. The determination and grit it shows employers, and also from the nerdy end, just like the pure intellectual joy you get from interacting with people from another culture and with their literature and their language. So for the most marketable aspect of this, in terms of how it helps your career. So I was very cognizant when I started Colgate that I wanted to do a double major in the sense that I wanted to understand the theory of how states interact with each other and how systems of states evolve. But then I also wanted a sense of, okay, how can I apply that to a particular state? Because being able to just sort of speak in the realm of pure theory about how states interact doesn't do much good if you can't also talk about how an individual state acts and how you can take that overarching system and apply it to an individual country with a real data set. So I kind of created my own program here in the double major so that I could take courses that fulfilled it for both the Russia side and the IR theory side. And I then took that and I then built a career on it. So I was very lucky because I was able to find a career down in DC doing foreign policy analysis where I focused on Russia's foreign policy toward other countries. It's sort of a rare example of taking a liberal arts major and then working that exact issue when you come out of school. But what it really did for me, though, is having that language background allowed me to then demonstrate to others, essentially, that I had an expertise that you wouldn't get otherwise. And to give you a quick example of that, one of the folks that I brief on a regular basis are people in Congress. And it's a painful experience. And if you have a particularly crotchety Congress person, the first thing they ask you is, okay, you purport to be an expert on this country. Have you been to the country? And do you speak the language? And if you say no, then they automatically dismiss anything you have to say as indicating that you're not an expert. The other sort of kind of quick vignette I want to spin is that, as I built sort of my expertise through work on international relations and on Russian, having that language skill then helped open doors down the line. So I was very lucky in 2012. So at this point I was, a young 28-year-old kid. And they put me in front of President Obama as one of the government's experts on Russia's foreign policy. And it was myself and it was another woman, same age as me, who went to Harvard and Middlebury to study Russian. And they handed President Obama our bios. And it was, this is Susie and Greg. And in my case, Greg went to, Colgate University. He's been to Russia, he studied, or he speaks Russian, he's an expert on Russia. In other words, that was a critical thing to convey to the president, here's why you should listen to this 28-year-old kid who looks like he's 12, who's sitting in front of you. That was just absolutely the highlight of my professional life. And again, gets the idea of the importance of credibility. As an employer, I would want to see that if somebody comes to me and says I'm an expert in XYZ country, that you can actually speak the language and that you have a sense of how that culture works. So that's the first part of it. The second part is the idea of determination. Regardless of what language you speak, if you went through the trouble to, in the case of Russian, say learn how to conjugate motion verbs, then you are made of some pretty stern stuff. And as an employer, if I look at an application and I see, wow, this person learned Arabic or Russian or German or Japanese, I know that this is a dedicated person who can set their mind to something, who can accomplish it, who can stick it out for the long haul, and who really cares about what they say that they're passionate about. One of the things I do now in a managerial role where I work is I look at applications for people internally who want to go to different countries and work abroad. And if they say, you know, I want to work in Germany for the next 2 years, well, I want to see on their application whether they speak German is important to me, but have you taken another language, because that demonstrates to me that you're able to learn this language. So that's the second part of it. All that's like the very marketable stuff, right? The third is just like the pure intellectual joy of learning another culture. And this is sort of one of my absolute favorite stories of being at Colgate is that, so as I said, I knew that I wanted to do international relations, but I didn't know what language I wanted to study. I did Spanish in high school, didn't care for it. I had a few courses of Japanese, and it didn't speak to me. But then as a senior in high school, I picked up War and Peace on a whim and read it and fell in love with it. And I thought there was something about the philosophy in this book, about the characters in this book that just speaks to me, and I don't know why. And I want to learn more about it. And I want to learn I want to learn the culture that produced this incredible work. So I went to Colgate and I learned Russian, and I took Russian courses and I engaged with Russian literature. The very last course I took, and I think it was with Professor Helfand, who's back there, was reading excerpts of War and Peace in Russian and discussing the philosophy behind it. And for me, it just like opened up this strange little arc in the universe where like, you know, I went to this place and I had my mind opened to an amazing way of looking at the world and a philosophy of looking at the world that came from Russia that I wouldn't have otherwise been exposed to, and then I got to actually see it from a little bit from a Russian standpoint. And so that's sort of, you know, the end of my remarks. Yeah, it's intellectually interesting. It helps you show determination and grit. And it's sort of a marketable skill that shows that you've got expertise. Go languages.
Go.
I think you're next.
Okay. No worries. Hey, what's up? My family's from Puerto Rico and migrated to the United States, or moved, just like we can move from like Texas to like Kansas, from Puerto Rico to New York City in the 1950s when the petroleum industry collapsed in Puerto Rico. That was around the time that something called OPEC was created. So everything shifted in terms of like the economy of oil and petroleum industry. So many Puerto Ricans migrated to the United States, close to maybe 50,000. My grandparents were among them. My mother was about 9 years old when she came to New York City. And she learned English in the public school system and speaks fluent English and terrible Spanish. I grew up hearing Spanglish at home and never really was interested in learning Spanish because initially I was pretty clueless about my heritage and my ancestry, and it just kind of was a student that just wanted to do the best that I could to excel, to provide myself with more opportunities to succeed. I came from a very poor family, single mother, raised us on public assistance, and education for me was going to be the solution to kind of like break that cycle of poverty. Spanish was actually introduced to me in high school, and I was fortunate enough to study for 4 years with the same teacher, Mrs. Puy, who was actually a native speaker from Costa Rica. And I took Spanish in junior high school, but I was very disinterested because it wasn't a native speaker, and there was the instruction wasn't taught in accent. It was just taught as a spoken word, but there just wasn't any context or culture behind it. But when I started seeing how Ms. Dupuy commanded the class, it kind of sparked something that wasn't sparked before. When I came to Colgate, I studied under Professor Rojas, who's still teaching. She's actually off this year. And I took Spanish with her for 4 years. Spanish for me as an undergraduate at Colgate University opened up an entire world for me that I wasn't even aware was always there for me. It connected me to my heritage, but it also connected me to the rest of the world. In the United States, about 38 million people speak Spanish, so that's like 1 in 10 people speak Spanish. Globally, about 400 million people speak Spanish. And although we live under an administration that is trying to quell any notion of diversity in this nation, it's an actual fact that we cannot get away from, and that's just a reality. And in this hemisphere, Spanish is actually the dominant language that's spoken in the Western Hemisphere in terms of like North or South America specifically speaking. So Spanish for me was actually an opportunity to connect to my heritage, and it opened me up to so many different things. Before learning and embracing Spanish as a language, I was very much into pop culture, pop music, even hip-hop music. But when I started learning Spanish, I started listening to salsa music for the very first time, and I started understanding and embracing the poetry behind some musicians like Rubén Blades, who was actually an activist from Panama and was the first artist to introduce social issues into his music. He even ran for president in Panama. And then I was introduced to the folk music of Silvio Rodriguez, Cuban folkloric musician. Beautiful, beautiful poetry, beautiful lyrics. And then I was introduced to Pablo Neruda and Gabriel Garcia Marquez, whose obituary went viral just a few days ago, even though he passed away about 4 years ago. And it opened me up to a whole other way of looking at who I was and how I was a part of the larger world. You know, I didn't feel like a minority anymore. In fact, I cringe at using that word minority. I haven't used that word since I believe I was a freshman at Colgate, so I was like 1989, you know? I started seeing myself as part of the majority. I was like, my goodness, I'm actually part of a larger world of people with a history, with a legacy. And embracing that empowered me in a way that I didn't feel I could actually be empowered. I thought the only way I was going to be empowered was just by academically excelling, but introducing language into my life and into my language, introducing it into my mouth literally, it introduced it into my identity, and it sparked something in my identity that I never thought was lacking. And because of my embracing of Spanish language, it opened me up to become much more of an individual concerned with social issues and social justice. Although my introduction didn't speak of it, I will tell you, as an undergraduate student, I was very active as a student activist. Sit-ins, protests. In fact, a lot of the protest work that we did actually led to the diversity that exists today, believe it or not. The core curriculum that exists at Colgate, like for example, there's actually a core curriculum course being taught about Puerto Rican studies. We, as undergraduate students, particularly those of Latino heritage, protested that we wanted to have our education and reflect our heritage so that all of us could share in our heritage, and that a core curricular course should not reflect just simply the roots of Western civilization, but it should reflect the roots of global civilization, and all of us should learn from each other. It shouldn't just be all of us learning from one Eurocentric lens. And I didn't realize the power of that Spanish language until I actually even came back to Colgate recently and started talking to students that are taking a core curricular course on Puerto Rico. Fucking blows me away that even exists, you know. And then I see how Spanish continues to open doors. And as an undergraduate student, I was actually president of the Latin American Student Organization. And at the time, we had a growing population of Dominicans and other Latinos from Latin America, but they were immigrants, and they weren't English dominant. So it forced me to learn how to speak better Spanish because I wanted to talk to my fellow students. And they helped me, and they would help me with my Spanish. So for me, my language development at Colgate was much more of a holistic development. It was in the classroom, and it was in the community, and it was also in my engagement as a student activist and as a student leader. I was president of the Latin American Student Organization. I used to DJ parties at La Casa, which is down the street. I actually renamed. I was actually the culprit that renamed La Casa. We backed the Jeep into the sign, hid it in the basement of the house. I took some paint, I repainted it to La Casa Pan Latina Americana, which is hilarious because I realized later that I translated it into the Latin American bread house because we're trying to say like Pan-Latin, like Pan-Africanism, and it's hilarious that it still fucking says the Latin American bread house, but that's semantics and stuff. And I realized then that Spanish was going to help me not only connect again to my heritage, but help me to connect to others. So when I left Colgate, I was a teacher for 6.5 years at a grassroots organization in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And I still live in the neighborhood to this day. I actually live like 3 blocks away from the high school I used to teach. And I taught there for 6.5 years. And again, majority of the students, it was mixed. There were some predominantly English-speaking students, but there were a lot of immigrants. I was able to talk to their families. I was able to talk to the students. I was able to connect. I was able to translate my curriculum. I was able to translate the work that needed to be done directly with parents in a way that I couldn't see before. And the parents were able to connect with me because they saw me as a fellow Latino that was invested and engaged and actually concerned about the development of our children, and obviously as a result, the development of our community. I made a decision as a young man when I had the chance to buy property, to buy my first property in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, in the south side of Williamsburg, which is predominantly Latino neighborhood, because I wanted children in the neighborhood to see a professional that actually has an education, has a career, but still lives in their neighborhood. So when I'm shopping in the local supermarket, picking up my plátanos, I'm literally talking to a woman who probably just finished her shift at a factory or finished her shift as a nanny, and I'm able to engage and I'm able to show them that we're all still part of this community. And I'm able to engage in Spanish. And Spanish for me was that significant, and it was really here at Colgate that it really gave me that foundation, because although high school introduced it to me, I didn't have a community that engaged me in language. I was in the classroom, I did my work, and then that was it. But when I was at Colgate, I did my work. I used to piss off Professor Rojas all the time because I used to curse a lot. I still curse a lot, and I used to curse in Spanish. And like, coño, and she's like, ay, God, por favor. And I was like, what? What did I say? I was terrible at accent marks. I'd get my papers back. It was like flick, 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 red, 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 and I thought I got like a terrible grade, and it was just. She was insistent on accent marks, which is fucking hilarious, because when she writes you an email, her emails are terrible because she doesn't know how to put spaces between her words. And I'm like, I should take a red marker to her emails and stuff. And it's evolved. Language for me has evolved. I've actually been running my own design studio for 17 years. I actually named it Somos Arte. Instead of calling it I'm an art studio or whatever. And Somos Arte translates into we are art. Because for me it's important to present my heritage and my culture and my art from its purest form. One of my friends, actor John Leguizamo, says it best that as Latinos, we always have to accommodate ourselves for everyone else. We have to anglicize ourselves for everyone else. When I walk into a room and I catch myself sometimes, I say, I'm Edgardo Miranda Rodriguez. I'm like, no, I'm Edgardo Miranda Rodriguez. And we always have to kind of change the way we pronounce our names or shorten our names. It's kind of like that Ellis Island effect that's been around for over 100 years here in the United States, that we always have to change who we are. But who we are is exactly that. It's who we are. And when we celebrate who we are, that actually helps us celebrate all of who we are, not just my experience, but all of our experiences. So I started my own design studio, and I started doing a lot of work with a lot of Latino organizations, both locally in New York City and internationally. My work has taken me to Monterrey, Mexico, where I was able to work with the Museum of Contemporary Art, Marco, and that was hilarious, because then I started realizing the complexities of Spanish, because it's like the complexities of English. We can go to Ireland or we can go to Australia, and after a while you will be like, wait, what? What? Because it's just a different vernacular. And I was in Monterrey, and for about a week into it, on the 5th day, I was like, okay, can we try English? Oh, see, yes, we can try English. And then the English was terrible. I was like, okay, we got to go back to Spanish. But for me, Spanish was powerful, and most recently, it helped me to kind of tap into my voice, my storytelling voice. And I'm very concerned about the current debt crisis affecting Puerto Rico, which is a humanitarian issue at this point. 3.5 million Americans live on the island of Puerto Rico, and they're suffering an $80 billion debt. And a board was put together, a fiscal board was put together a year ago, and they have until May 1st to present a solution that doesn't see any reality in actually being formed. So I created this comic book of all things to give me the platform to reach a broader audience to talk about these social issues. Because it reminded me of as a student when I was here and I was able to connect with immigrants who were students here for the first time. And my comic book has actually done that. I wrote the comic book bilingually, and I've actually spoken at universities in Seattle, at art centers and museums in New Orleans, in Philadelphia, Connecticut, across the United States, and I'm continuing to tour throughout the year. So what I would impart, based on my testimony, is coming more from my own experience, which is that Spanish helped me connect to something that was always a part of me. And one of the things I actually learned is that being an American, I did not have to actually deny and forget about my actual heritage. Embracing my language actually made me more American than I actually never thought I could have been. And in my area, it gave me the ability to communicate with families, with students in my work in education and my work in social justice. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done, particularly with so much work that's happening. So much is happening now with immigrants across the United States, and there's such an important need for us to learn Spanish to actually engage and help and be a part of a necessary progressive movement to remind each and all of us that this is what this nation is built on. It's built on an immigrant community, and when we forget that, we forget ourselves, and that's what we should never do. We should always embrace who we are, and in embracing who we are, we make ourselves available for a better nation. So that's my talk. Thanks.
Wow, I so should have gone first.
I gave you the shot.
You did. It's on me. It's on me. All right. So my name is Luna Zagoretz. I'm class of 2016, so I just graduated still less than a year ago. I've never met President Obama, and I don't have a comic book. For this, I ask you to forgive me. But I'm here representing Arabic, so Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. أنا اسمي لونا زاغورتس. أنا طالبة في جامعة ييل للحصول على دكتوراه في الفيزياء وعلوم الفلك. So I'm Luna. I'm currently a first-year graduate student at Yale University, going for my PhD in physics and astronomy, which is an interesting continuation of an Arabic background. So let me touch on three things. Let me touch on kind of my very short history with language. Let me touch on Arabic at Colgate, and let me touch on what after, especially if you're in physics, of all things. So I was born and grew up in Serbia. Serbian is my first language. I lived very briefly in the United States when I was 6 years old due to political circumstances, which is when this happened. So excuse my New Jersey accent. I actually, Joycey. When I got home, I went to first grade, and my teacher started teaching me how to write in Cyrillic, and he was so confused because he had never had somebody who mixed up E's and I's before. It's because in Serbian, they're E and E. They're the absolute opposite of what they are in English, and he just couldn't understand until my mother explained to him, and it was like, oh, okay. So I learned to speak Serbian first, but I learned to write English first. And this is the way I've grown up, and this is the way that I've always been. I've always had a two-track mind. And so I did an exchange year in a high school in Massachusetts for my senior year. And after that, I got into Colgate. And so the summer after my exchange year, which was hard, 10 months away from home with nonstop was hard, I was excited to finally be, a college kid, and I dreamed of going to school in the US for so long. And I went online like the geek that I am and looked up all the courses and, made up my schedule. I was going to take 2 cores. It was going to be great. I had it all figured out. I was going to take physics and math and legacies and core India, because then I got, 2 requirements out of the way. And then Serbian mail service being what it is, I got the actual registration packet. Approximately 1 day before the deadline, that had this little throwaway flyer that said Living Egypt, and I said, wait, what? And I read it, and Living Egypt was an extended study that Ustaz Nadi and Ustaz Zanor, who's not here right now, in the history department, were leading to Egypt. And I have been in love with Egypt since the age of 8. Before coming to Colgate, I'd been there 4 or 5 times. I've lost count. And Arabic is something that I'd always wanted to do, but I wanted to do it in the way that, like, I don't know, I want to go paraglide. I like want to dive out of a plane. Like, I wanted to do it, but I didn't know if I saw it happening for myself. And so I saw this flyer that says, hey, why don't you take a class all about Egypt, and after that we'll take you to Egypt for 3 weeks. And all we ask in return is that you concurrently take Arabic. And I thought, wow, okay, this is a real opportunity. Like, I have to do this now, and it's fine. I'll just take Arabic for a semester, and then if it's hard, I'll quit. At least I'll know how to read and write. It'll be something. I get to take a class in Egypt. Nobody's offered me a class in Egypt before. So I reworked my entire schedule, like the little nerd child that I am. I'm pretty sure Professor Nora hated me for the first month because I was the person that kind of like started talking over her, just over like vibrating from excitement that somebody gets to talk about Egypt and like, oh, well, when I was there, this is what I would hate myself in that class. I would absolutely hate myself. And Arabic was interesting because the first day we had class, Ustaz Nadi walks in and goes, Ana ismi Nadi Abdel Ghafar. And we're all like, hi, Professor, what's your name? And he's like, Ana ismi Nadi Abdel Ghafar. And we're all like, and he's like, Nadi? And so we started completely in Arabic, and I think it was a shock for all of us. We had it 5 days a week. Every other language had it 4 days a week. We had to have it 5 days a week. Arabic was always that one step extra, and always will be.
You mean you got to have it 5 days a week?
Yes, I'm getting to that. But basically, it was incredibly rewarding and also incredibly overwhelming. I just remember feeling like I'm in this pit. I'm in this like pit of dirt that's, like above my head, and the only way to get anywhere is to like claw the walls little by little. Like I don't have a lot of room to move, but like today I learned how to say my name, and tomorrow I learned how to count to 5, and the day after that I learned how to write the sounds up to L. And it was really exciting. And after just a month or so, I could kind of look back and went, wow, I've learned so much in this month. And it just kind of like, it went on from there. It never got any easier. But it was always the kind of thing where if you just forgot for a little bit to stop and turn around and look at yourself, you realize how much you've actually learned and how much it's piled on and what window it gives you. You kind of like dig the dirt a little farther, and suddenly you can see afar, you can move, you can talk to people. Suddenly it's freeing. And so we took the trip to Egypt. We did classes of Egyptian Arabic for 3 weeks, which was like, oh man, I just learned like standard Arabic, now you're gonna make me take Egyptian Arabic? I don't know how to say this. And people would laugh at me on the street at saying way too formal things. But it was great. It was the best trip I'd ever taken in my life. And so the semester after that, when I was like, I'm a physics major, I should focus on math, and maybe I should take comp sci, because comp sci gets you a job afterwards, right? I'm an international student, I need a job, I can't be sent back, right? But no, Arabic won't give. And so for 3 years after that, I continued taking Arabic.
The baklava.
It's all the baklava. In fact, by junior year, I couldn't take it. My course load was too full. So I audited Arabic twice a week, 4 to 6, as a 6th class. That is the power of the baklava, people. A 6th class. And the semester after that, after a long and lengthy fight with Colgate, I got to go to Egypt for a semester abroad. I studied at the American University in Cairo. I took 4 Egyptology courses and only 1 physics class. And it was amazing. I have no words. But I also thought that I could connect to it very differently than my friends who come to the same program but from other schools from an American background who just didn't have that level of Arabic. Even if they were bigger school, one of the people was from UNC. They might have been bigger programs with longer histories, but they just didn't have that level. They didn't get to take Arabic 5 days a week. They didn't get to audit Arabic as a 6th class, 4 to 6. There's something really special about this program, and you don't understand how much you've learned until you look back and you're like, wow, I've gotten so far. And I was really able to talk to people and to talk to my Egyptian friends in a way that I think a lot of the other exchange students weren't able to. And come that summer, I participated in a dig in Luxor, which is a city in Upper Egypt. That's where the Valley of the Kings is. If anybody knows, it was my dream. And there were two very obvious camps. There was the camp of the foreign archaeologists that come and dig, and there was the camp of the local workers that carry baskets full of sand in 50 degrees Celsius heat during Ramadan. And the only way these two camps interacted was a single Egyptian who spoke English. Not one of these people whose work in life was Egypt spoke enough Arabic. And I found that mind-boggling. By the end of the 6th week, I was the one person that the workers could speak to. I didn't have great skills, and God, the accent was pretty hard. But what is wrong with this picture that they can speak to me, a junior from, a privileged school, versus these people who have been working in Egypt and working about Egypt for 10, 20, 30 years? I thought that was mind-boggling. And that, I think it really gave me a different experience. And I think that this is incredibly self-serving, but I think that everybody should want to have that experience. It gives you a completely different way of thinking. It builds a third set of train tracks in your head. You can't go where there are no tracks. I think the most amazing thing is learning Arabic and learning words like hurba, and learning that these feelings that I have that I can never describe in Serbian or English exist in another language, and describing that there's a word for that. I think that's a very powerful feeling. So that was the summer after my junior year. Senior year, I did not get to take Arabic, but also Ustaz wasn't teaching it, so it wasn't important. So now I've done a full year of just physics classes, and quite frankly, I miss Arabic. I miss languages. I miss the anther side of my personality. I miss being the person on two tracks. And I think that it gives you a complete different way of thinking and a complete different way of interacting with the world around you. And I think, what is physics if not thinking up a new way to interact with the world around you and to think about the world around you? So I'm really pushing to go back to it as an elective next year, or even the year after that if necessary. And there's not an obvious link. It's not French. It's not going to let me go to CERN and pat somebody on the back and be like, hey, what's up? I too speak French. But I think it's incredibly important, and I think it's incredibly important in times like these where, not so long ago, it was me picking up the American accent because of political circumstances, and now every time I see a Syrian woman at the supermarket that gives me a terrified look because she doesn't know if I'm going to scream at her for wearing hijab, I can say, Assalamu alaikum, Izayk, alhamdulillah, and you can see the relief on her face. You can see the relief that somebody is actually relating and somebody is doing their part to relate, and not just liking a Facebook status.
So now we'll open it up for questions, and from what I know of Hispanic, Arabic, Russian cultures, I don't think these are cultures that we think of as passive and shy, so I hope none of you will be passive or shy with your questions. Yeah.
All right, so, all of you studied languages that are big and important in the world and have a lot of speakers, but what would you say about what if your biggest passion language is about a language that doesn't have a lot of speakers? I'm really interested in Finnish and the Uralic languages in general, just the whole family that it's related to, I'm taking Russian now, and I'm also really interested in that too, but what if I'm also interested in a language that's not as widely spoken? Could I get something useful out of that if I'm studying that language? Could I? What is it that's fascinating you right now about Finnish? Is there something specifically you're drawn to in literature or history? I guess there are several factors. I think it's a really pretty language. It's the most beautiful language I've heard. And also, I mean, I think its status as like a European language that's not related to most European languages is kind of interesting. It kind of stands out in a smaller family of its own. And also like I also kind of appreciate like Finland for all the I don't know, they're like one of the happiest and most successful countries in the world, and I like admire how they have like strong welfare state and social safety net and all those things.
Have you visited yet?
No, but I might be going this summer.
You know, I was struck by how you said, you know, is it useful or not? And it sort of depends on how you define utility for yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You know,
exactly.
I mean, you know, something that I find, and this only pertains to myself, is that the idea of, I find beauty in novelty, right? And if studying those languages brings some type of like beauty to your mind or novelty of it, that is in of itself
Yeah.
useful.
Exactly.
And, right.
That's exactly what I was thinking. I totally agree with you with that, because it doesn't necessarily have to serve a grander purpose, because it's fulfilling something for you.
Yeah.
You know, and by fulfilling that for you, it may open you up for something else beyond the Finnish language that you possibly weren't aware of yet. You haven't even been to Finland yet.
Yeah.
You might explore something there that may open you up to a whole other world that you have yet to become aware of, and Finnish may just be the gateway for you. So it's personal to you,
Okay.
and that's actually, just like Rick said, that is what makes it useful. That is what makes it important.
Okay. So then, I could go into, I mean, I could find some way to make it useful, couldn't I? Like, I could do something involved with Finland or...
Oh, of course.
Yeah,
Of course,
like,
but
it doesn't
first you have to almost like find for yourself what's your entry point for it, because if I think in anything in life, if you go in like, okay, what can I do with this, then you're kind of like immediately like missing the point there, you know, because his introduction to Russian was literature. He didn't say, sheesh, what am I going to do as a professional career? It's like, no, he was fascinated by literature, and that. He had no idea he was going to end up as an analyst in his career, but that book opened it up, and it was actually the Russian version of the book that opened it up. So that's why I'm saying you don't know yet, and it's also unfair to you to already think I know what it's going to be. Just what I would impart is be open. There's a lot more that's there for you, and it's actually a beautiful space to actually be able to explore what comes next. And you're still young. Trust me, I'm like more than double your age and stuff. You have a lot of life left.
And and I think it's like a really interesting language too. Like its grammar is completely different from English. Like it just expresses things in different ways.
So you're asking about basically underrepresented languages and not necessarily global languages. I mean, I'm here talking about Arabic, but my first language at the end of the day is spoken by, well, depending on how you define it, because there's the whole political thing, but like no more than 20 million people, right? And you can pry it out of my cold dead hands. I think that every language, and especially languages that are different to the language logic that you're used to, are incredibly relevant, because I think that more than anything, they change the way you think.
Yeah.
Because language is a tool, right? You can't use every tool the same way, and it makes you necessarily learn certain skills and how to deal with it. And it gives you a completely different worldview, for one thing. For another thing, you're saying you're also taking Russian, for instance, you're interested in taking other languages. So I personally don't speak Russian, but I speak its cousin. It's not immediately obvious to me that Finnish and Russian have necessarily anything in common, but learning any language is an entryway into learning another language. Learning your second language is incredibly hard, but learning your third one is that much easier, and learning your fourth one, it goes like that.
Yeah.
It's so long as you're actually willing
Not
to
many
do it.
Relatives of Finnish that are spoken by a large.
Well, yeah, but you can always, take Hungarian. I don't know, but I think it is incredible. I mean, my sister who lives in Italy, and she'll sometimes sit down and be like, okay, so like, let's say, so my boyfriend is French and I'm Serbian, and we're living in Italy and we have the kid. Okay, so the kid is going to learn Italian from its surroundings and it will learn French from its dad because dad only speaks French. So what if I talked to it only in English? But no, that's a crap base for learning other languages. Like, we have these discussions. Basically, my sister and I should never reproduce. We're going to make little monsters, quintilingual monsters. But the point...
It's not like a bad thing.
It's not such a bad thing. But the point is that no knowledge gained is bad knowledge.
Right.
And you never know what it's going to lead into, and you never know what it's going to allow you. I think, for instance, like in Arabic, I think I had a much easier time hearing between the like 4 T's and 3 S's, the difference between them, because I had the Serbian basis and I knew how to roll my R. I think, for instance, English and any Slavic language really give you a very wide base of how to learn other ones. So even if it's not the same grammatical structure in Vietnamese or something you want to learn tomorrow, there might be sounds hidden in there. You're training your mouth, but more than that, you're training your brain. And I think that's never a bad thing.
Can I add something on to what
Please.
you said? So I was really struck by when you talk about like the 2 tracks in your mind, like adding the 3rd track, because it really does make you think differently. And Professor, I apologize, I'm probably going to murder this word because I haven't vocalized it in a while, but the word in Russian, неостранение, which means, if I believe I've gotten this correct, essentially the sense of seeing something familiar as if you're seeing it for the first time. Like maybe like that sudden realization when you look in a mirror and you don't recognize yourself in the mirror for just like a split second. And I've actually taken that concept, which doesn't have a word in English, and I use that at least implicitly in my analysis. Like that's what good analysis is. It makes somebody who sees the world through a certain lens all of a sudden say, oh my God, I've been looking at it all wrong.
Right.
It's sort of like, and it's just those very kind of weird, quirky things that can jump out to you and restructure how your mind works when you study another language.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions and comments. Anybody else? All right. If no one asks any more questions, you're not allowed to eat any more fruit or or fruit-infused water.
For our Colgate students, the usual problem is the culture shock when they go visit a different country or things that they are not used to compared to here. Can you comment on that? What was, in Russia when you visited, what was the most unusual thing, and how did you deal with it back then?
Boy. I have to reflect on that for a moment if anybody else has like a more immediate answer.
I think the most shocking place in the world is the United States. So I might not be coming from a place that's like, I still don't know if somebody says, oh, let's get coffee. I still don't know whether they mean it. I always have to be like, but for real though? Or like, is it the American, let's get coffee? I don't understand.
Well, I'll speak. I'll say a little something because I did think of something. It always comes to my identity as an American with a Puerto Rican heritage. This 2017 is actually the 100th anniversary of the Jones Act, when American citizenship was imposed on Puerto Rico. And although when you're born in Puerto Rico, you're granted American citizenship, it's literally you're living within a space of being a citizen of an island that is taxed without representation, literally, and it's a colony. So we are on the island believing we are as Americans, and when we come to the United States, we're not received as Americans. We're received as second-class citizens. In fact, there's actually much more of a passion to embrace our heritage when we came to the United States. That's why salsa music was invented in New York City. That's why the Puerto Rican flag was designed in New York City. That's why there are cultural institutions across the United States and in Philadelphia and Chicago that celebrate and record Puerto Rican heritage across the United States, because there wasn't a place for us. So we made a place for ourselves in the United States, because this was our country as well. And when I visit Puerto Rico, with everything I kind of like amassed and acquired culturally and through in general, I didn't fit in Puerto Rico. I wasn't received as a Puerto Rican. I was like, no, you're New Yorican. You're from New York City. You're not Puerto Rican. And then I was like, shit, I'm neither received at home in New York, and I'm not received in Puerto Rico. And so and that was an amazing culture shock for me. That happened to me as a child. That happens to me as recent as an adult when I was there last summer promoting my book, and I was literally being interviewed on live television on a morning show in Spanish, and they introduced me as a New Yorker whose parents happened to have been born in Puerto Rico. And instead of just introducing me as a writer or introducing me as a fellow Puerto Rican, I was like, and it just totally caught me off guard. And I'm like, this is live TV. How do I bounce back from that? So that's where my culture shock kind of like kicked in. And I think I mentioned a little bit when I was in Mexico, because the one thing I did learn about the Spanish language, very similar to English language, is that there's not one universal version of Spanish. Spanish in Mexico, in Spain, in Venezuela, in Puerto Rico, in the Dominican Republic, they're all completely different, well, not languages, but they're completely different, vernaculars, completely different, idioms are completely different from one another, just like English is different, no matter, depending on where you are in the world. You got something now?
Yeah, I was traveling, and I was in Sarajevo, and we were sitting on at a restaurant on a hilltop, and the way that Sarajevo geographically is structured is it's sort of like it's a bowl, kind of surrounded by mountains that go around it, and so there's a lot of like cacophony as sounds sort of bounce among the mountains. And it was around 5 o'clock or so, and the church bells started ringing. And there's this beautiful sound of hundreds of church bells ringing in the city. And then as the final church bells are fading, the call to prayer comes out. And it follows as the sun sets, and the sun's setting as it goes down the river valley. And so you've got the call to prayer. And so the beginning of the call to prayer, it's all slightly mismatched by a couple of seconds as it marches down the valley. And so you've got this beautiful cacophony of the call to prayer and lingering church bells, and they're all bouncing back and forth off the mountains and blending
Call to
together.
prayer for Muslims, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
The call for prayer for Muslims.
Yes.
Just because I think some of them didn't get.
Oh, okay. Apologies. And and as this like cacophony sort of rose up out of this sort of bowl that is geographically Sarajevo, and a city famous for the mixture of cultures. I don't know if I have like a point of this story, except that it was a beautiful just sort of blending of language, in this case language through music, that completely shocked me as a American who had not done much traveling in his life, and it's just sort of this kind of auditory memory that's always going to stick with me.
Back to me.
So I think one thing I'm also really interested in studying. I'm also really interested in like minority languages, like languages that are minority languages in their own country, like Welsh in Great Britain, for example. I'm especially interested in the minority languages of Russia, like the Finno-Ugric languages of Russia in particular, and Uralic languages in general. And do you think that those are, well, I mean, it's really hard to find resources for learning those in English, but I might like to learn one of those eventually. Do you think that would be worth it, even though it's not necessary to communicate with people? Because, like you said, language has its own like intrinsic value. Do you think it has an intrinsic value there too? Learning.
I think it's still the same. I think what we said before still kind of resonates. The one thing I will add is that there is definitely a power in immersion. And there's one thing to actually have instruction in class. There's one thing when you're actually immersed in a nation that actually is only speaking that language. I've had a few co-workers who taught with me, and they were just, all they spoke was English, and they wanted to learn Spanish. And I was like, good luck. And they went to Venezuela, or they went to Guatemala for like a summer. Literally like the whole summer break, and they came back in the fall speaking fluent Spanish, and it blew me away. I was like, wow, the accent was a little off, but they were conversational. And I was, and I you know, how was it? It's like I had no choice. I had to learn. So it's kind of like similar to your experience in class, but imagine that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for like 3 months. So what you might want to consider, in the future, and also for anyone else, immersion is an amazing opportunity to embrace a completely different language literally outside of the classroom. And these were, and in this context, these were all teachers. And I've known at least 4 different teachers, and all completely different backgrounds. One was Pakistani, one was Chinese, 2 were just generic white. I don't know where their heritage is from. I love that about white people. They're always like, oh, I'm just white. I'm like, no, come on. You know, you got some German, Dutch, Welsh, or something in there. Oh, I'm just white. But they all embraced the language because they embraced it was an extension of their work. They were teachers. So they went to Guatemala to teach, right? And they learned how to speak Spanish. They learned how they had no choice, but they had to learn how to communicate with the community. And they, especially my friend Hashish, who's Pakistani, he lives in Washington D.C. And there's a large population of immigrants from Latin America who Spanish is their first language, and he's actually able to engage. And now he's able to create curriculum because he can speak Spanish, and he's able to create a curriculum that engages with his student. And he actually retired from teaching, and now he actually works with the Department of Education in D.C. developing curriculums for different schools, all because he took one summer and he did an immersion program, and it just was like this completely mind-opening, I'm not even gonna say eye-opening, mind-opening experience for him. And it completely gave him a new global perspective, and in his case, it made him a better scholar and a better educator.
It also seems like me that to me it seems like if that's your final goal, then learning Finnish and learning Russian is probably exactly what you need to set yourself up to be a person who can learn in that environment. Also, I think that minority languages are incredibly important, and a lot of languages are being lost. And I think that if that's something that interests you, you should absolutely pursue that. And
my dream would be to learn Udmurt. I don't know if every single speaks Russian has heard of that. Have you heard of that?
Can't say I have.
But I think languages that are, in danger of dying off or they're not very represented are incredibly important. And I think immersion is absolutely the best way to do it. That's how I've done language immersion. It's incredibly hard, but it's incredibly rewarding. And also, I guess my last push for doing Arabic, other than we have the best food. I was not a missed major, by the way. I finished half the major, and then I told Ustaz, "Oh, by the way, I declared anthropology." You did what? But
Serbian kebabs are pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's true. We haven't beat there.
She was the adopted Miss Major.
I'm the adopted Miss Major. I got a plaque. It counts. I got the plaque. But so I was talking to my friend the other day, who was also Annalisa, she was a Miss Major. She was in Arabic with me throughout. In fact, she took more Arabic than I did. While I was in Egypt, she was in Morocco, etc. And so we were talking. She's taking her prereqs and going to go to med school, and I'm in first year of grad school, and my finals are in 9 days, and I'm freaking out. And I'm kind of talking to her, and I'm like, was undergrad this hard? I don't remember it being this hard. How is it this hard? And she goes, Malish. We survived Arabic with Nadi. We can survive anything.
Was what this hard?
Was undergrad really this hard?
Undergraduate education.
We haven't heard any questions from that end of the room.
Yeah, just a lot of hard stares, occasional smile.
Maybe they want to leave.
Right? Right there.
So I have a question, but I'm not sure how to phrase it. What do you say to a person like myself who wants to either pursue one language pretty in depth or multiple languages on kind of like a service conversational level? Do you think in your own experience you regret going all in on, say, Russian, Arabic, or Spanish? Would you have rather learned multiple languages, or just anything you have to say about that? I don't know how to say that otherwise, but...
Okay, well, personally, I go all in on nothing. No, that's not true. So I've only taken Arabic in my time here, but that is not the first foreign language I've studied.
Right.
So, like I said, I grew up pretty bilingual, so I don't necessarily... I consider English a foreign language when it suits me. But otherwise, I've learned French, Italian, Arabic, and I took Latin. So I'm completely fluent in none of these, but I don't regret getting each of them to the point of kind of like, if you dropped me in Geneva for a summer, I could get by and I could be fluent by the end of the summer. If you dropped me in, Milan for the summer and like just let me on my own, I could survive. I think that it's it just depends on what you want from it. With languages like these, I'm happy with my kind of like reading capabilities and the knowledge that like if I put a certain amount of effort into it, it's there and I could perfect it. But for me, Arabic is kind of like my baby. Arabic, I really wanted to go all in on. In Arabic, I still want to go all in on. And, as much as I am a perfectionist, I think you need to draw the line of when you can say, I speak this language, meaning that I can communicate with somebody with a ton of grammatical mistakes and, my professor shooting daggers at me from the corner. But, like, that's okay. And when you're kind of like, no, I want to speak like I'm a native. I want the accent, I want the whole 9 yards. I think it depends on what you want, and I think that any mixture thereof is fine.
I know from like a government perspective, I mean, we would view like conversational ability in multiple languages as being as impressive as like incredible native language ability in one language. They're both, impressive achievements and demonstrate ability to learn and master a language. It's a sort of way natural predilection is.
Cool, thanks.
Nothing really? No. Thank you. At least one woman speaks out.
I'm not sure how to phrase this, but like, so I'm a Spanish major, and like as like a white person learning Spanish, like how do you like, not just as a white person, but like as a person you're like learning a colonial language, so like how do you like balance the like use of that language to like connect with people and like, I don't know, but like also like do you consider like how you're using the language, like I don't know if that makes sense.
What do you want to do? You want to teach? You want to write? You want to go into politics? Like, what do you want? What do you see yourself
I think
doing?
I want to teach.
You want to teach? Where do you want to teach?
I don't know.
Well, that's important because depending on what you're going to do with the language, if you're going to teach in a major city in the United States, if you're going to teach in a city near the border, for example, if you're going to move from the United States to go teach someplace else, that's all important in terms of what you do with language. I can say personally, particularly like having worked in a school with a very diverse staff. The majority of staff they were very, very progressive. They were very in tune with social issues, and we were incredibly diverse. Yes, there were Latinos like myself that were teaching, but there were a lot of white teachers as well. And it was a beautiful sight when students opened up to someone who actually spoke their language and understood them, or parents opened up. And if it comes from a sincere place, it doesn't matter where you come from because you're making an effort. And it's not just Spanish, I think it's any language. When you really make an effort to understand another people and you're able to communicate with them on their terms and you're not just coming in with this kind of like often misperceived perception of what it is to be an American, like, doesn't anybody speak English here? And you're like in Serbia, and like, dude, really?
Yeah, not just here.
Exactly, it's like, come on, it's just like, and I that's really what was the power of being multilingual, because you're respecting that you're not living in a world that revolves around your language, your English, and I think traveling is important. When you literally leave the United States, you're like, fuck, everyone is not just speaking English anymore. And we live in such a monolinguistic society, our culture is so monolinguistic, but we have to always remember that English is not the official language in the United States, believe it or not. It isn't. So it's what you do with the language. If you want to add on.
My wife is learning Spanish now. And the reason she's learning Spanish, she's a middle school teacher in Montgomery County, Maryland, outside of DC. And a lot of children from Honduras have ended up there. And they've undergone just tremendous violence. And they have trouble communicating that in English, of course, because that's not the language they grew up with. And my wife has found that by learning Spanish, she can more easily connect with and empathize with and learn from those students who have undergone that violence. And so in that case, that's coming certainly from a good place because it's based on communication and empathy.
Right.
May I have time for
Yeah,
one final question?
Right here.
Unfortunately, not as much directed at you.
Hmm?
But so when you're when you've like learned a language, but you're not using it every day, like at work or with people who like speak that same language, like what do you do to maintain it and like keep it from failing? And like, I guess more to all of you, like you've been out of college for a while, and like how do you continue to like expand on what out of undergrad?
I can answer one thing real quick to that, because my wife is actually not a native Spanish speaker. She's actually Korean American. So what I literally do, just for myself, I listen to Spanish music a lot, intentionally, so that I can actually continually like practice, because I'm not constantly talking Spanish to someone all the time. So even on my way over here, I was literally like listening to like Mark Anthony singing salsa as I'm ironing my shirt. So that's what I do for myself, to kind of like immerse myself as often as I can, or at least immerse the language around me. So.
Yeah, sorry for the face. I'm still dealing with the fact that I'm an alum. Mentally, I'm 12. So yeah, I think actually music is a big part of it. The way I think of language, I think that it's kind of like this, I don't know, substance that if you don't use it for a while, it gets like put in the box, and the box gets locked, and the key gets, put somewhere. And then when you have to use it again, you're like, oh crap, what did I do with that key? It's kind of like trying to guess your password that you created in junior year of high school or something. And you're like, wait, what was I into junior year of high school?
It's not like riding a bike, in other words.
No, but after a while, it's there, it comes back, but it needs a little bit of coaxing. And I think music is actually a very powerful way to learn language, and we actually learned Arabic through music a lot, and that's still how I keep up with it. For Arabic specifically, there's this wonderful app called Hami, which is like Pandora, but for Arabic music, I guess, and you can kind of like even choose like what country it comes from or like what kind of style. And basically, Amr Diab is my homeboy. So that's how I keep up with it. I also like get all of these recommendations from my Egyptian friends and being like, hi, what's the worst Egyptian soap opera that I can watch? And then I just kind of like, I haven't gotten to it yet, but I have a list of just kind of being like, okay, I need to stop, like Netflixing Friends for the 20th time, and I need to watch this, because then you actively have to watch it and to think about it and to just be interacting with the language. If you're at a reading level, reading really helps. Even for myself, sometimes I'll read books exclusively in Cyrillic just because I live in internal fear of forgetting Cyrillic. I think there's a lot of ways to keep up with it.
You good?
Yeah, I don't have anything to add.
Well, great. I'd like to thank all of our panelists
Thank
for
you.
coming.